term emergency management can be simply defined as the coming together of individuals and communities to work together during the time of a catastrophe. Archaeologists have uncovered petroglyphs that depict times of disasters, such as fires and storms, being encountered during the primitive period. Since these early findings, emergency management has grown into an organized field where interagency work closely together whenever a natural or man-made disaster strikes. It is the intent of this report to look at three early 1900s disasters and look at how interagency cooperation impacted the response and recovery efforts. The report will also look at any possible lessons learned and discuss what changes were made after each disaster. The overall intent of the report is to show how interagency cooperation has had a positive impact on disaster response and recovery efforts during the early 1900s. The report will conclude with a summary of the findings from the three disasters and comments by the writer myself as to what might be in store in the future. Early 1900s disasters. Between 1900 and 1918, there were three major disasters which impacted the United States and show the interaction between governmental agencies and non-governmental groups. The disasters were the 1900 flood, which occurred in Galveston, Texas, the 1906 earthquake with accompanying fires in San Francisco, California, and the 1918 influenza pandemic, which had an impact on the entire country. While these were totally different types of disasters, they all required working with governmental agencies, nonprofit organizations, as well as volunteers and the local communities. In early September 1900, the deadliest hurricane to date had an almost direct hit on the city of Galveston, Texas, and the surrounding islands. As a result of the storm, there were approximately 6,000 deaths, if not more, associated with the storm. Storm warnings were received from Washington, D.C. beginning on September 4th and ran through the 8th. These warnings were distributed all along the coastal region so individuals were aware of the pending storm. As the storm approached, there were no typical signs which indicated any threats. In conjunction with the Weather Service, there were volunteers who helped monitor conditions. They had volunteers monitoring the tides and others checking the weather instrumentation for as long as it could be done safely. As the storm approached, they had a volunteer monitor the phones to provide information to the residents who called. They even took the steps to go out into the community door to door to warn people and made suggestions about stacking goods well off the floor. There was a cooperation between both the Weather Bureau and the insurance underwriters to develop charts that were used to document flooding and damaged areas. Before the debris was cleaned up and many bodies of those lost were removed, groups got together and we determined to rebuild. Railroads were working with the community to get back online and make necessary repairs. Another disaster which happened during the early 1900s, which had an impact on emergency management and how people worked together, was the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and the associated fires. While the actual start of this disaster was the 1906 earthquake, it was the fires that many of the people remember. Since this disaster was a combination of two disasters, it required the coordination of many different groups to respond and extinguish the fires. Putting out the fires was complicated by the hills within the city of San Francisco. Water lines were broken by the earthquake, and trying to get water to the elevated areas was becoming a challenge. Both the fact that lines were broken and some water supplies were elevated, it was just not possible to get sufficient water to fight the number of fires. This fire also required fire companies to work together to find a source of water and then pump along to areas where needed. A third disaster, which was encountered in the early 1900s, was the influenza pandemic of 1918. This pandemic was felt not only here in the United States but also overseas. It was the failure to contain the influenza virus that caused such a large outbreak of the disease. While the pandemic hit different sections of the world at different times, it essentially came in the force of three waves. This pandemic resulted in a virus that was able to infect both humans and animals. This is another reason that it was so devastating. Since this pandemic affected people around the world, it brought together medical researchers from around the world to help combat the disease. In addition, it required governments to work together to prevent or slow the transmission. Lessons learned. When it came to the Galveston hurricane of 1900, there were many lessons learned and changes that needed to be made to ensure this type of disaster would be prevented. It was agreed that future improvements were needed to be made stronger and include the damage sustained by the 1900 hurricane. In repairing the railroad bridges, it was agreed among all parties that they needed to be raised about 10 feet to assure they are not damaged by future storms. The Southern Pacific Company also agreed that their rock dikes needed to be built in a manner so they will be able to survive future incidents. In looking at lessons learned from the San Francisco earthquake and fires, it was found that most of the building construction materials were extremely flammable. Fire departments were still in the infancy stage, and it was determined that there were insufficient fire suppression methods. With fires in large cities, there needed to be an increase in the number of fire stations and firefighters to extinguish fires of this magnitude. Water was an issue in trying to extinguish the fires. Damage to the water lines because of the earthquake resulted in minimal water pressure. With San Francisco sitting on the hills like it does, having water available at the elevations was an issue. Being that the city is located on a bay, there was definite shortage in the number of fireboats available to fight fires. Another lesson learned was the fact that insurance companies at the time did not cover disasters like they do today. There were many different policy holders who did not have insurance because the disaster had two major instances rolled into one. Lessons learned from the pandemic included the need to contain any disease and prevent it from spreading like that of the influenza virus. The consequences of failing to contain a disease epidemic can be disastrous. As a result of the early 1900s disasters, there were changes that were made to build codes, building designs, insurance requirements. It was not until 1803 that the federal government provided any financial assistance related to disasters. While this was the start of the federal government financial involvement, it was not until the 1930s or so that the government was used for emergency management financial support. In conclusion, the early 1900s brought about a significant number of disasters throughout the country. The three that had the most impact were the Galveston hurricane of 1900, San Francisco earthquake and fire of 1906, and the great influenza pandemic of 1918. While these three disasters resulted in both loss of life and property damage, there were lessons learned that led to many positive changes. Being in the early 1900s, many of the lessons learned when it came to natural disasters such as earthquakes, fires, and flooding resulted in changes to either the building codes or the engineering design requirement. Many of the early buildings were constructed with materials which could catch fire easily. Buildings were not constructed to withstand the forces of wind and earth movement. Because of these disasters, the design for roadways, bridges, levees, and rock dikes were improved to protect cities. In the case of the San Francisco earthquake, changes were made to address seismic conditions, better understanding the needs to fight fires, and placement and design of underground water lines. In addition, they also showed how different groups work together, both among government agencies and private sector groups. Even in the early 1900s, people came together at the time of a disaster. During these early times, it showed that there were not necessarily the number of agencies that responded, but how they worked together to get warning out to the public, and then helped with the necessary changes that needed to be made. Today, we see that collaborating at the time of a disaster is essential. It provides for ensuring that everyone is on the same page and that better solutions and direction can be provided. It also will result in faster and better organized recovery operations. It is essential that everyone work together, whether it is during a hurricane, earthquake, fire, or a pandemic. Groups providing solutions always provide for better results.